tanks or aircraft. Even in 1942, the Junkers Ju-87 remained one of the most effective aircraft available to the Luftwaffe. More commonly known as the Stuka, this aircraft had played a pivotal role in the early campaigns, before its combat deficiencies became apparent in the Battle of Britain. Transferred to the Eastern Front with enhanced armament and increased armor protection, it gained a new lease of life. Although still no match for single-seat fighters, in German-dominated skies, and in particular over the wide expanses of European Russia, it still retained the power to deliver paralyzing blows. In independent operations or in support of ground forces, Stukas would be heavily committed in all phases of the campaign. The Luftwaffe's principal frontline fighter throughout World War II was the Messerschmitt Bf-109. The F-series, introduced in the spring of 1941, incorporated a number of improvements on the aircraft that had so narrowly failed in the Battle of Britain. With a redesigned fuselage, a new propeller, and a larger, more powerful engine, it was considerably faster and had a higher service ceiling than its predecessor. In the first year of the war in Russia, Messerschmitt pilots had racked up huge scores, partly through their own flying skill, but also because they possessed a far superior aircraft. In the East, the Messerschmitt was yet to meet a serious challenger. In the spring of 1942, the officers and men of the Wehrmacht had every reason to expect that their exertions would yet bring them victory. True, they were not as strong as they were in the summer of the previous year, but nor were their enemies. In their march through western Russia, they had destroyed the best part of the Red Army, killed or captured well over 6 million Russian soldiers, and seized more equipment than the factories of the Reich could produce in a year. They justifiably regarded the Red Army as a shambles, tactically incompetent at all levels, and redeemed only by the raw courage of its individual soldiers. By contrast, they saw themselves as seasoned professionals. Even those facing combat for the first time did so confident in their own abilities and in those of their comrades. Underlying this conviction were the solid foundations of training and discipline. Thoroughly schooled in the techniques of modern warfare, German soldiers were also expected to demonstrate personal initiative. On the field of battle, the ability to act quickly and effectively under pressure was highly prized. Soldiers of all ranks were trained to be adaptable, to be aware of the wider tactical situation, and to be able to assume commands higher than their own rank. By Western standards, discipline in the German army was harsh, but much more was expected of a German soldier than had been demanded of his British or French counterparts, with all too predictable results. It was this combination of far-sighted and effective training programs, sound battlefield experience, and excellent modern equipment that had brought the Wehrmacht so close to victory in 1941. In the end, the soldiers of the Wehrmacht had fallen victim to circumstances largely beyond their control. With the return of summer, they gathered their strength and prepared to resume the advance east. During the spring and early summer of 1942, the Red Army suffered a number of catastrophes, of which Kharkov was merely the largest and most damaging. In the Crimea, it had lost a further 200,000 men, as well as vast quantities of equipment, and in the centre and north, half as many again. No other nation or government could have sustained these losses, yet the Red Army and its leadership remained unbroken. This was partly due to the seemingly inexhaustible reserves of Russian manpower and to the single-minded ruthlessness of the Soviet government. But it was also a reflection on the extent to which the Soviet Union was geared up for war. In 1941, the German High Command had been shocked by the sheer size of the Red Army and by the volume of equipment captured during the first phases of the campaign. Much was obsolete, but there was ample evidence that the Russians also possessed a range of modern, highly effective weapons and, more disturbingly, the capacity to manufacture these in quantities that Germany could never hope to match. Many of the armaments factories had been overrun, but more had been saved, stripped down, and shipped east to be rebuilt beyond the reach of the Wehrmacht. Though full production would not resume until 1943, enough was reaching the front to maintain the army's defensive capability. Moreover, the experiences of the past year had forced a rationalization of the munitions industry. Obsolete weapons would be phased out, and those of proven value given priority of resources. Although not often credited, Soviet tank design was, by 1940, superior even to that of Germany. Most of the work had gone into heavy tanks, and this bore fruit in the superlative KV-1. The KV-1 anticipated by some years the need for increasing thicknesses of armour. In fact, the KV-1, when it first appeared, was the most heavily armoured tank in the world, and by far the most formidable. Its principal weakness, as with most heavy tanks, was its relatively slow speed and limited range. It was also comparatively costly to produce. For these reasons, KVs only ever formed a small part of Soviet tank strength. Widely acknowledged as one of the most successful tanks ever built, the T-34 achieved an outstanding balance of the three fundamentals of tank design: firepower, mobility, and protection. When it entered service in 1940, its high-velocity 76.2mm gun was well in excess of the armament carried by German tanks. This, combined with superior armour protection, gave it a deadly advantage, which it retained well into 1942. The T-34 was also ideally suited to the climate and conditions of Soviet Russia. An exceptionally rugged suspension system and wide tracks gave it full mobility in all seasons and over all but the most impassable ground. On top of all these qualities, the T-34 also had the advantage of being cheap and easy to manufacture, and by the end of the war, over 53